Good afternoon, my fellow peers and lecturers. We are Group 13. During this presentation, we are going to analyze and dive into the English legal system, as well as go in depth on how common law and equity develops over a span of time. In addition to that, we are also going to discuss the material case facts of Coral Leaf Limited and Silverbond Enterprises and another, and discuss the ratio decidendi of the head judge of the case. Furthermore, we will also delve into the role of inferior and superior courts in how they develop judicial precedents and both the downfalls and advantages of it. Me and Divya will now go on to talk about the historical development of common law and equity. I will start us off with common law. The historical background of common law dates back to the Norman conquest. Different areas of England at the time were governed by different systems of law adapted by the invaders who settled there. Dane law applied in the north, whilst Mexican law around the Midlands and Wessex law in the south and east. The king, therefore, had little control over the country as a whole, as different set of laws governed his people. It was only until William the Conqueror came about and gained the throne in 1066. Yes, that is how long ago it was established. He established a strong central government and had representatives going to the countryside to standardize law, as well as becoming advocates in local disputes. This then became the standardized practice as common law was produced and ruled the country as a whole by 1250. I will now pass the floor to Divya to talk about equity.
The development of equity. Equity arose as a response to the limitations of common law, particularly its focus in technicality and sole reliance on monetary damages. Dissatisfaction with common law rulings led people to petition to the king, who was known to be the fountain of justice. The king then passes these petitions to the Lord Chancellor, who then begins to make decisions based on good sense and fairness. Ultimately, this led to the establishment of the Court of Chancery. In this court, remedies beyond monetary compensation were granted. For example, injunctions and specific performance. However, over time, conflicts between common law rulings and equity began to emerge. Nonetheless, this issue was resolved by the landmark case of the Earl of Oxford case, where the courts found that where conflicts between equity and common law exist, equity would prevail. Therefore, it can be said that equity has significantly influenced the legal development by introducing new concepts, equitable maxims, and broadening the available remedies.
This case involves a dispute over shared ownership in a company between the claimant, Coral Reef, and the defendants, Silverbond Enterprises. The claimant alleged a 90.99% shareholding based on documents which defendants disputed. The defendants sought security for costs, as they believed that the claimant might not be able to pay if they ordered. The claimant refused to provide financial information, citing a previous court ruling that allowed them to withhold such details. However, a recent Court of Appeal decision changed this stance, citing that the claimant's refusal to disclose financial information could lead on the interference of inability to pay the costs. The day before the security costs hearing, the Court of Appeal reversed the previous ruling, emphasized the deliberate refusal to provide financial details could indicate an inability to cover costs. The claimants argued that they were unaware of change due to timing, but the master rejected this. Nothing the previous judgment had varied on this issue. Yes, the claimant contended that the master must follow the High Court judge's decision, but the master disagreed, citing they were equal standing.
The master referenced a previous case where a master's decision was deemed equal to a High Court judge's in terms of precedent. The claimant challenged this, arguing masters were not judges and lacked the same reporting standards. However, the master defended the equality of masters and judges in terms of precedent, noting that judges could still review and overturn a master's decision if deemed incorrect. Ultimately, the master rejected the claimant's reliance on the previous ruling and granted the defendant's application for security for costs due to the claimant's failure to provide financial information. The decision highlighted the evolving nature of legal precedent and the importance of disclosing financial details in such cases.
My name is Hannah, and I am going to talk about the role of superior courts in developing precedent in the UK. The English legal system stems from the principle of judicial precedent, in other words, stare decisis. Stare decisis, which translates to stand by things decided, is a legal doctrine that directs judges to follow earlier rulings or ruling from higher tribunals when addressing cases involving seemingly identical circumstances. Judicial precedent are created and shaped in large part by superior courts, which are made out of Supreme Court, the Court of Appeal, and the High Court. Through this, it ensures stability, predictability, and uniformity in the way the law has to be applied. Hereinafter, we are going to discuss the Higher Court's role in the establishment of judicial precedent, as well as their operation and the legal framework that they have shaped through their rulings. Moving on to the significance of the hierarchy. The court's hierarchy structure is vital for the implementation of the concept of judicial precedent. The rulings of the higher courts operating under the same jurisdiction bind lower courts. This hierarchy promotes uniformity, coherence in the law by ensuring the lower courts adhere to legal principles established by the higher courts. Superior courts primarily interpret legislation, develop common law, and ensure that justice is administered. When there is a new legal circumstances that involve complex legal issues, the superior court's ruling on the case will set binding precedents that will be applied for the cases that have similar facts and same situation. The common law history rests on the decision-making and interpretation process by superior courts, setting it apart from the civil law system that places more importance on codified statutes. Let's talk about the role of the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the judicial hierarchy. The UK Supreme Court is the highest appellate court, and its decisions are binding on all other courts in the country. However, its own past decisions are not binding to itself, but are considered persuasive. The Supreme Court can overrule its previous rulings by using the Practice Statement 1966, but it does so carefully to ensure legal certainty, and the court judgments often deal with important legal principles and constitutional issues, establishing binding precedents for lower courts. A notable example of the Supreme Court role in developing precedent is the case of R. and Joji, 2016. In this landmark decision, the Supreme Court revisited the doctrine of joint enterprise in criminal law, significantly altering the previous understanding and setting a new precedent, reflecting contemporary values and social changes. The Court of Appeal, divided into the Civil Division and the Criminal Division, also plays a vital role in precedent formation. The Court of Appeal is bound by its previous decisions and those of the Supreme Court, but it can distinguish cases based on the facts and occasionally depart from its earlier rulings when justified by exceptional circumstances. Following the landmark case of Young and Bristol Airplane, it was established that Court of Appeal can depart from its previous decisions by three specific situations. First being that when there are two previous decisions that are contradicting to each other. Second is when the Supreme Court overruled its prior decision. And third, if the decision was made per inquiry, which is in error. The court, notably under the aegis of Lord Dennings, attempted to escape from the constraints of stare decisis. However, the House of Lords repeatedly reasserts that the binding nature of its decisions on the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal rulings are important because they provide extensive interpretation of the common law principles and statutes, addressing a wide range of legal issues. These rulings guarantee a unified and equitable implementation of the law, providing the practitioner and inferior courts direction. For example, in Miller and Secretary of State for Exiting the European Union 2017, the Court of Appeal's interpretation of constitutional principles was instrumental, though ultimately the Supreme Court provided the final authoritative judgment. The High Court, consisting of the Queen's Bench Division, Chancery Division, and the Family Division, serves a trial court and an appellate court. Its decisions are binding on inferior courts and are influential in developing the legal principles, particularly in areas such as commercial law, equity, and family law. High court judgments often clarify and elaborate on legal doctrines, contributing to the body of the case law that shapes the future of judicial decisions. For instance, in Donahue and Stevenson 1932, a case heard initially in the High Court, duty of care in negligence law was significantly developed, laying the groundwork for modern tort law.
Johanna, now I will be doing about the inferior courts. Firstly, we have the Crown Courts. The Crown Court deals with serious criminal cases, including indictable offences, and either way offences that are referred up from the magistrate courts. It handles trials by jury and sentencing for serious crimes. Now, the significance of the Crown Court plays a crucial role in delivering justice for serious offences, ensuring that individuals accused of grave crimes are tried fairly and that appropriate sentences are imposed. It maintains confidence in the criminal justice system by addressing the most serious criminal matters. Other than that, we have the county courts. Now, the county court handles a wide range of civil matters, including contract disputes, tort claims, family matters, housing issues, and even debt recovery. The significance of the county court is essential for resolving civil disputes efficiently and fairly, providing access to justice for individuals and businesses in various non-criminal matters. It ensures that civil rights are protected and legal remedies are available at a local level. Other than that, there's the magistrate courts, which deals in the vast majority of criminal cases, including summary offenses, either way offenses, and preliminary hearings for indictable offenses. It also handles certain civil and family matters. The significance of magistrate courts are that they are the cornerstone of the criminal justice system, handling a high volume of cases swiftly and effectively. They ensure local access to justice, involve community members in the judicial process through lay magistrates, and even provide a cost-effective forum for addressing minor offenses and disputes. Now that we know the inferior courts, and we know that they are generally bound by the doctrine of precedent to follow the decisions of the higher courts, there are few specific and limited circumstances where an inferior court might depart from higher court decisions, or rather may deviate from established precedents set by the higher courts. Now, one of the primary ways inferior courts can depart from higher court decisions is by distinguishing the facts of the current case from those of the precedent case. Now, distinguishing occurs when the facts of the present case are materially different from those of the case that established the precedent. This allows the court to apply a different legal principle. Two cases demonstrates this process, and that is the Balfour and Balfour in 1919 and the Merritt and Merritt in 1971. Both cases involved a wife making a claim against her husband for breach of contract. In Balfour, it was decided that the claim could not succeed because there was no intention to create legal relations. There was merely a domestic arrangement between a husband and wife, and so there was no legally binding contract. The second case, however, it was successful because the court held that the facts of the two cases were sufficiently different in that although the parties were husband and wife, the agreement was made after they had separated. Furthermore, the agreement was made in writing. Now, this distinguished the case from Balfour. The agreement in Merritt was not just a domestic arrangement, but meant as a legally enforced contract. Now, other than that, there's also the per incurium, on the other hand, which emphasizes that a court might not follow a higher court's decision if it believes the decision was made through lack of care. Now, a decision is considered per incurium if it was made in ignorance of a relevant statute or even a binding authority. Now, the case of Schorschmeyer and Henning in 1975 and Miliankos and George Frank in 1976 argued that the previous decision was per incurium since it did not consider the changes in the international monetary system, which then convinced the Supreme Court to overrule its previous decision, agreeing with the Court of Appeal's reasoning. Therefore, if a higher court's decision ignored a crucial piece of legislation or an earlier binding precedent, the inferior court might argue that the decision should not be followed due to this oversight. However, there are limitations to the usage since it can only be applied in rare and exceptional cases, said Lord Donaldson in the Ricards and Ricards in 1989. Other than that, in human rights cases, under the Human Rights Act of 1998, all courts, including the inferior ones, must interpret legislation in a way that is compatible with European Convention on Human Rights, the ECHR. Now, if following a higher court's decision would result in a violation of ECHR rights, an inferior court may depart from that decision. Now, according to Section 21A of Human Rights, 1998, it is said that the courts are required to consider any ruling or determination made by ECHR if following a higher court. A decision will result in a violation of the ECHR. Now, the Court of Appeal then stated that the ECHR case emphasis was on the impression that the facts will be given on an objective basis. Therefore, inferior courts may seek to interpret the law in a way that aligns with human rights principles or refer the matter for higher judicial review, as illustrated in the case of re-medicaments. Number 2, the Court of Appeal refused to follow the decision of the House of Lords in R and Go, the Crown and Go in 1993, because it was slightly different from the decisions with the ECHR.
Now let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of a judicial precedent. What is a judicial precedent? First of all, as mentioned earlier, it's a principle where courts rely on past decisions of similar cases, and there's a positive side and there's a negative side to it. And I'm going to talk about the advantages of a judicial precedent. And the very first advantage is judicial precedent is time saving. Precedent also saves time and resources for both the courts and the parties involved in a lawsuit. Since judges don't have to re-examine the settled legal issue from scratch one by one, they can easily take the precedent and resolve the case quickly, which benefits both the parties and the lawsuit and the system as a whole. For example, let's just say a lower court is hearing a case about a breach of duty, breach of contract, and the legal issue in the case has already been decided by a higher court in a previous case. The lower court can simply apply the precedent set by the higher court to the current case rather than having to re-examine the legal issue from scratch. And the second advantage is there is certainty in the law. A judicial precedent enables lawyers to advise their clients with a greater degree of certainty. By referencing past decisions in similar cases, they can predict the likely outcome of a lawsuit and recommend the best course of actions to their clients. And this empowers individuals to make informed decisions about personal legal actions. They know what to do and they know what to expect based on the established legal principles, and they can also generally understand the legal consequences of their own actions. Judicial precedent fosters consistency and predictability, while the Supreme Court's power to overrule ensures that the law can evolve. This dynamic system helps maintain a balance between stability and progress in our legal system. When a case has been heard for the first time, the outcome sets a new judicial precedent for similar future cases. This process also allows judges to consider past cases with similar circumstances, even if they're not identical, and draw from them to make a new ruling. Think about it this way. Have you ever been the first person to try a new recipe? The law is similar like this. Sometimes a judge encounters a totally new legal issue, and that's where precedents come in. They can look at past cases with similar situations to get a sense of how things should be handled and keeping things consistent, and this way people know what to expect from the courts. One of the main arguments is that judicial precedents are rigid, and the world keeps changing and that the law needs to keep up. Well, I agree with this. This is where the Supreme Courts come in.
Imagine a precedent set in a time with limited technology. This case, the Supreme Court could potentially overrule if the rise of social media creates new legal issues, new legal questions. And although the doctrine of judicial precedent can be rigid, the Supreme Court's ability to depart from its own decisions and make new rulings, make new decisions, shows the flexibility within the law and the flexibility of judicial precedent. This flexibility allows the court to adapt into changing circumstances and ensure that the law remains relevant and effective. We mentioned precedent as a guide for judges, right? Like a trusty recipe book. But what if a recipe calls for an ingredient that you just can't find anymore, or one that everyone knows is bad for you? The same can happen with precedents. Take segregation, for example. Back in the day, Plessy versus Ferguson case said separate but equal was okay. Separate schools for white and black kids. Sure, why not? But times change and people's idea of fairness change too. This is where Brown versus Board of Education comes in, the Lemma case that challenged Plessy versus Ferguson. It is said separate but equal just doesn't work anymore. Segregation itself hurts children no matter how fancy the separate buildings are. The court in Brown versus Board of Education explicitly rejected this doctrine, stating that the segregation in public schools education or schools was inherently unequal and therefore unconstitutional. This shows that the judiciary can adapt legal principle to better reflect contemporary understandings of justice and equality. It allows legal system to address issues like discrimination and outdated practices that were once deemed acceptable in society.
Thank you, Yasmin. So I will be talking about the disadvantages of judicial precedent. Firstly, the principle of stare decisis can lead to rigidity. A common criticism the doctrine faces is the constraints in place of discretion of the judiciary, which can often lead to miscarriages of justice. Judges are often held in rigidity, as this can be pictured in the case of Presley v. Fowler. In this case, the employer wasn't held responsible for vicarious liability when their employees were acting within the scope of their employment. It had majorly limited the ability of judges to penalize employers for negatively impacting upon the well-being of their employees until the doctrine's abolition, which was the result of the Law Reform Personal Injuries Act. In addition, the system of doctrine depends on claims in litigation, ensuring a bad judgment may last years if there is no relevant claim. Complexity is another significant disadvantage. The accumulation of case law can make the legal system complex. The volume of decisions in cases like Young v. Bristol illustrates the difficulty in navigating precedents' future decisions. This signifies the decrease of ability not only of citizens but also legal professionals to understand case law due to its high complexity. The volume of case law can be overwhelming, and accessibility issues are highlighted as a disadvantage, as a judge may provide several reasons for their decision, which can lead to the ratio decidendi being obscure. Moreover, lawyers can find it difficult to decide what the law is due to the abundance of precedents to decide from. Sometimes precedents can conflict with each other, creating uncertainty. The legal foundations of cases are established by trial and error with conflicting precedents. As a result of this snowball effect, a court can be faced with countless precedents which it has to decide to follow. To make things worse, if a case with a new issue is in court, the court must decide whether to refuse the decision of the case or to state what the law should be because the court has no precedent to follow. This can be illustrated in R.V. Gold. The appeal was allowed even though there was a previous precedent against the defendant. The judicial system can be slow to adapt to societal changes. Stability and certainty in law can hinder the adaptability of law to changing technological, economic, and social circumstances. In addition, case law is retrospective. Due to its nature and slow to change with changed social perceptions, which is illustrated in RVR. Before 1992, a man could be not found guilty of raping his wife as it was considered consensual on the basis of marriage. Immunity for a husband's rape could only be altered after the case of RVR.
Thank you, Danya. Now I'll be concluding our overall presentation. Our exploration of the English legal system, particularly in the development of common law and equity, the structure of courts, and the advantages and disadvantages of judicial precedent, highlights its overall importance. The case of Coral Reef Limited against Silver Bond Enterprises Limited demonstrates how judicial precedents can adapt, influencing the future decisions. Master Matthews observed that the doctrine of precedent is based on the principle of stare decisis, which requires lower courts to consider and follow the decisions made by higher courts, where the material facts are the same. He also further states that as a general rule, courts should follow earlier decisions of themselves or of other courts in the same level. This emphasizes the importance of legal stability and predictability. Ultimately, the doctrine of precedent ensures consistency and predictability, while its flexibility allows the law to evolve and reflect societal values. Thank you.